All right. Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining my session at SciFiDevCon. This talk is titled The Light Side or Dark Side with Azure App Configuration and Feature Flags. And I'm Brian McKeever. I'm going to be your host for this talk. Very excited to talk about this functionality and ability that you can do with your .NET apps, especially utilizing some libraries from Microsoft and some functionality and features from Azure when it comes to configuration of apps and how it can be decoupled from deployment. I'm going to get into all that. I'm going to show you a couple demos today. I'm going to talk about why certain things worked, why they didn't, and maybe you can learn how to do this technique in your next application or maybe in the current application that you're working on. So I thought I would start with showing that a little bit. And again, I just want to thank the organizers of the event, especially Brian Gorman. He's been an amazing organizer. So much has gone into this. I bet it was a ton of work. And I just want to thank you, Brian, for the opportunity to do this. So couldn't be excited, and I think it's a fantastic theme / way to handle a fun little virtual conference. So let's get into it. And I got to click the right slide. Here we go. Try that again. As I said, my name is Brian McKeever, and I work at BizStream, and I'm a Jedi Knight there. Well, not really, but I like to think of myself as if we're in this theme, if we're talking about Star Wars and things like that, there's a lot of different ranks when it comes to Jedis. And I'm not quite a master at many things, although I know quite a few things. So I kind of put myself in that knight rank because I'm always trying to learn about what's new and what's best practices. And, maybe one day I can be like Yoda a little bit more. But honestly, my real title is a solution architect and co-owner at BizStream. I also happen to be a Microsoft Azure MVP for my knowledge with Microsoft Azure, especially when it kind of comes to .NET development, best practices, how to deploy .NET apps into web apps or app services, use the tooling that Azure has around hosting a .NET app, whether that's Azure Storage or Redis Cache or configuration or Key Vault, all the things that it takes to run like a modern .NET Core solution in Azure. That's the stuff I do every single day at BizStream. And we happen to specialize in content management systems delivery using tools like Kentco Experience and Content by Kentco and a couple others as well, but those are the two that I use the most. So I'm also recognized as an MVP in those platforms, and that plays a little bit into the story today, which is why I'm kind of overviewing it. But generally, I know a lot. I've been doing this for almost 20-something years now, even all the way back into classic ASP days. I've used all the .NET versions. I've been using Azure for years, and I help our clients all over the place do that. And when I say our clients, that's because I run an agency called BizStream. We are a digital agency that's been in business for almost 20 years now, actually. And we serve people across North America, up into Canada a little bit, even there, and down into South America a little bit. And those clients are usually big organizations that have complex website needs, their integrations with systems, e-commerce, and they're actually coming to us often to how do we put in a website or an app that leverages Azure? How do we help them migrate to the cloud? And we build and design and develop and do all the fun things that it takes to do that. So we're based in West Michigan. Grand Rapids actually is a fantastic place to visit in the summer. Please do not come here in the spring even or winter because actually it snowed yesterday. Yes, it snowed in April. Somewhat ridiculous. But anyways, that's all I'll talk about myself and BizStream. The rest of the story is going to be about what I want to show everyone today and what I want this session to be about. And that is feature flags and how we can toggle certain things on and off, combining that with Azure App Configuration, which is basically a way to have a cloud-based service that handles knowing what's the status of your feature flags and how you configure those. And then I'm actually going to do this in a Blazor project that's been around for a while that I used to teach myself a little bit of Blazor when it first came out. So unfortunately, the talk isn't going to be about the Millennium Falcon, the Death Star or X-Wing. Even though that would be a ton of fun, I don't think anyone wants to sit here and listen to me talk for like 45 minutes about Star Wars stuff. Even though I probably could, but we'll just skip that and we'll kind of get into things. And honestly, I'm going to go into a story of how I use these technologies in the real world to solve a real problem, which I always think is a good way to do a talk. And it's not just like theory about, well, here's a cool new technology that maybe no one's ever used. I always like having, real world experience to go with concepts. I think that's a fun way to really narrate about learning with technology, and I would encourage you to do that yourself if you're a speaker and you're listening. So let's set up this scenario. As I said, we're using these three technologies: feature flags, Azure App Configuration, and Blazor. But how or why are we using them? And maybe that's where the Millennium Falcon comes in. Maybe it's where some bad guys come into play. But actually, you know what? Just like Emperor Palpatine, I'm sorry. I may be a little bit nefarious, but I lied to you all. Yep, sorry. Totally true. I lied. I'm actually not going to talk about Star Wars anymore at all, other than kicking off the talk. I'm actually going to talk about CrossFit. And sorry, I know not everyone's a CrossFit fan, but generally my story or our context for this talk revolves around the fact that I had to build something for our CrossFit community for an event that we were doing, and I used these technologies to do it. And I happen to be a CrossFit enthusiast. I actually did it this morning, and my legs currently hurt from that. And a lot of our people at BizStream do CrossFit. This is my business partner and co-owner, Mark Schmidt. The two of us like to code and lift heavy things. Obviously, he's a lot better at it, as you can tell, but I have a lot of fun doing it, and it keeps me healthy, and it's my hobby. So sorry you're going to hear a lot about CrossFit today. In fact, the first rule of CrossFit is to always talk about CrossFit. And I thought this meme actually does a fantastic job, that really had to hurt, of kind of summarizing this story. So I had to build an app for my CrossFit team, and it's a lot like this lifter. When he first lifts, he was very excited. He gets that weight all the way up there, about to go all the way to the top, and fails miserably. Yeah, we'll watch it one more time because it's kind of fun. This must have definitely hurt this guy. And ouch. That's exactly what happened to me with my story, my application. We were doing an event that's called CrossFit Rolling. And I know almost zero people have probably ever heard of this term, especially the people listening and watching this talk. So let me set it up and explain. CrossFit Rolling is a combination of bowling with a team and the row machine that you would find at any CrossFit gym or really almost any fitness center out there. The idea is that you have a team, there's 10 frames where every single person on your team, in this example, the 5 people I have listed here, Brian, Mark, Dave, Josh, and Shelby, we were all on a team together. And each of the 10 frames, you have to row exactly 100 meters. And for every meter over or under, that is your score. So if you row 101 meters for Brian in frame 1, your score is 1 for that frame. And if you row 99 meters, your score is also 1. So it's either over or under. You're trying to hit it right on. And you do that 10 times for each person, and your total score at the end is calculated by those frames, and the lowest number wins. So you're actually trying to get as close to 0 as possible. And we actually did this event as a fundraiser to help out someone in the community who's had a rough time. I'll just leave it at that. I'm not going to get into all the details. But basically, we had a bunch of teams. We had a bunch of row machines at the CrossFit gym. And we were trying to raise money for this family. And it was a lot of fun doing it because there's a lot of competition involved in CrossFit. And we're trying to beat other people. And there's a lot of trash talking. Maybe that's why I like it a little bit. Okay? So for that, I actually had to build a leaderboard. And I wanted to build a leaderboard that we could present up on the gym so that as people were filling out the frames and putting their scores in, they could actually hit their phone and just tap an easy number to say, yep, I had a 3, I had a 10, or I had a 1, whatever it was per frame. And then, because we were doing this as a big live event, we had 14, 15 teams going at the same time. I'd like to present it up in real time on the leaderboard and have teams move up and down the leader list as the event happened. And it just so happens that Team Hungry Like a Wolf won the event because they had a total score of 64, which is actually really freaking good. They're really good at rowing. And everyone else kind of fell below that. So I built this app in Blazor and connected it to a few different components so that way while we were there, we can have kind of this real-time scoreboard update that just worked to track the scores. Okay? And here's where I really wish I would have known about feature toggles or feature flag management in applications prior to this event. Because, spoiler alert, my leaderboard completely died on me during the event. It didn't update in real time. I had a whole bunch of hiccups because I finished it like, the night before, as you would with any good side project. And it really kind of bothered me. And I made it work throughout the event. But basically, if I would have known about feature flags, some of the changes I made like the night before, I could have just maybe turned on or off, because I built the whole app without it being a real-time update, and it would still work. Each team could add their score, the list would change, you could refresh the page, and it would do it. But at the last minute, I decided, hey, why have someone manually refresh the page when we could just have it automatically refresh? And I added this new feature, and I deployed it to production, as any good developer would do, right? Well, maybe feature flags could have saved me some egg on my face from having the thing break. And let's talk about how. And I gotta get back to my cursor. So talking about how, I'm gonna break into our components about how these things worked and why they would work. So I'll introduce a little bit, and I'll then come back to the story as we go through these pieces. Okay, so I'm gonna break off of the introduction, and instead of just talking about it, I am going to show it. If you give me a second to get all of my browsers in order. Okay. All right, so what we're looking at here is the Azure portal. I've provisioned a resource that's an Azure App Configuration resource, and it has the ability to have features in it. So I'm going to go over to the Feature Manager blade, and you can see I currently have 4 features, and they all have the ability to be enabled or disabled. This is the main reason you would use this configuration, is to be able to enable or disable these flags. And that's the way to think of them, is a flag is a way to turn on and off functionality that your code knows about without having to redeploy the code. Because it's easy to have app settings configurations or whatever in your config files, but maybe you don't want to have to do a redeploy and wait for recompile or something like that if you're using Azure App Services. Why do that when maybe you could have something that's a click of a button that maybe anyone on the team, even the business person, could kind of handle for you and not have to worry about it. And I'll talk more about that in a second. But just introducing that these are flags. They have names, and they have a enabled true or false, and then they have a label, and I'll come back to label in a second. But that is where this starts. The idea of if I can toggle functionality on or off based off a flag, and my code knows about that, that's an amazing thing. And that's actually kind of where the idea of this talk came from. If I can toggle working for the light side or working or fighting for the dark side with a flip of a switch, pretty awesome, right? And well, it all kind of ties together anyways. But all right, so there is a little bit of the feature flag management in there. Let me kind of maybe go back to the presentation here a second. I feel like I should have the hotkey for this. And get back to here. Okay, so that was our demo. I'm just seeing I'm only starting a demo. I'm just kind of setting it up. So these features are defined. They're in the Azure portal, and they're out of my code base. That's what I wanted you to get out of that. Okay. Now it takes code to actually line that up the right way, right? So now we're going to dive a little bit into the Blazor app, see how we started some of this code, and talk about how do we wire up this ability to have something turn on and off outside of the code base, right? And it starts with this. It starts with 2 simple NuGet packages. Because honestly, these 2 features, feature flags and Azure App Configuration, can be used separately. You wouldn't have to necessarily have an Azure App Config resource to work with feature flags. It's its own package. In fact, it's the Microsoft Feature Management package. It now works in .NET 6, .NET 5, and .NET Core 3.1. However, as you all should know, you should only be really building new things in .NET 6 from today going forward, because that's where the long-term support is. But I just did want to see, because we see it on the screen, and actually even .NET Standard 2 means we could probably get this working in full framework, but that's a story for another day. The second package that you need to get this going is the Azure App Configuration ASP.NET Core package. And as any normal .NET project goes, you would use your command line tool to add it as a package reference, add a Visual Studio to do it. However you want to do it, doesn't matter. You just have to get these 2 packages that come from Microsoft, that are supported by Microsoft, into your .NET solution. And that is the starting point. So get those 2 packages, use these commands, or just Google for the names, however you want to do it. Put that in your project. Okay. Then from there, what happens is you start defining features, and without Azure App Configuration, the feature can be solely in your app settings.json normal config file, right? And just like at the top of this little JSON sample, you normally would see logging and maybe environment or SQL connection string or something else in the normal app settings. Right below that, here's the basics for defining the feature management flags that your code will know about. So we kind of define feature management as a section of settings, and then we define the feature name. This one is called feature T. There's actually feature U, feature V here. We've got 3 features in this example. And then there's a couple other things, but basically this is where it starts. And you can use the normal settings configuration providers to read these values out, and you'd have them in your code. Okay? That would alone would allow you to use the feature management library and feature flags. The way that would start is in your startup. And again, this is somewhat speaking, because I built this app previously, somewhat speaking to .NET Core 3, .NET 5 world. I didn't have time to fully update the whole talk for .NET 6 as it has come out recently, but the samples in the Azure App Configuration and feature flag documentation on the Microsoft Docs, they're all up to date, right? It's not that much different. So this is still the same concept. We're going to basically enable feature management as a service by using Microsoft Feature Management. That's pretty darn simple. I hope it doesn't take much more explanation than that. But basically, that gets us up and allows us to have the code that knows how to deal with those app settings in our sort of class libraries. We'll call it that. Okay. Then inside of your configuration, this is a normal configure file, right? You've seen it 100 times if you're a .NET developer. The environment is development. Use developer section page. There's going to be more things in there. I kind of truncated that for brevity. But right before kind of use routing is where you would kind of add in the line of use Azure App Configuration. That brings in the second piece of functionality from Azure, right? So feature management number 1, Azure App Configuration number 2. From there, here's where it starts to get tricky. And you don't have to know how to write all this from scratch. The documentation has it to begin with. But basically, those first 2 examples, we've just kind of told the solution. We're aware of using these things. Now we have to configure them and tell the host builder, the actual real brains of program, how we want to use them. And there's actually a couple different options. So I'm going to walk through these couple lines pretty specifically, as opposed to just kind of glossing over them, as most people do inside of program.cs sometimes. So really we want to start with these lines, because everything else was pretty normal stuff for starting up a .NET Core website. What we've said is, in our builder configuration, we want to add Azure App Configuration with these following options. We want to pull which resource in Azure we're going to connect to through the options.connect line. And we're going to use our environment variable as one method to do that with, where you could put environment variables. You could use this from your user secrets, which is actually what I will do in the full demo that we're going to walk through in a second. You could pull from Key Vault. There's a lot of places that you can kind of pull the connection string to the Azure resource. Think of that as just your normal access key or connection string that you would connect to any, Azure SQL database or external blob storage account, whatever you want to call it. You have to connect to something in Azure, and that's the first line that says, go connect to my Azure App Service to make sure security is correctly handled and that I can talk to that resource and not anyone else can. Then we're going to configure optionally, again, you don't have to do this next statement, but I'm going to optionally configure the Azure App Configuration to automatically refresh. And here we're actually using refresh.register with a sentinel, which is basically a setting of did something change in the Azure App Configuration? Did something toggle true or false? I'll talk about more of that in a second. And then I want to set a cache expiration time in the next line that says, after a couple minutes, or actually in this case 1 minute, don't rely on what I have in session or in memory. Go ask the resource again. This is the whole, if somebody just toggles it on Azure, how does the code base know about it? And then again, I want to make sure that these configurations are tied to the feature flags inside of my code base. And that's where that last statement comes in. So it'll take the configuration it gets from Azure App Configuration and map it to the feature flags we've defined in either app settings.json or other places. So I may have went through that a little fast, but connection string from there, refresh via a sentinel, which is optional, but it's basically did something change or not, and go ask that question every 1 minute, and then and then use feature flags as that bottom row. A little too fast. Okay. Once you have that, that would be enough to get up and running. But I did want to show another option without having to completely recompile the demo like 10 times. Instead of doing environment variables, you could very easily pull that connection string out of Key Vault. So, you would just use your Key Vault credentials. And that's one thing I like about Azure App Configuration. It has kind of this automatic Key Vault option to pull in security settings for Key Vault. So probably a good idea if you're using this in a big shared team resource. Also, try to keep your secrets out of your repositories. All good stuff, right? But that is what would also a second choice to make this work. So there's the Key Vault highlight and all that good. And then there's actually another way, which is instead of waiting on a sentinel to say did anything change that expires over 1 minute, here's another set of configurations that really say, you know what, I want the flags themselves, if one of them changed versus the others, I'm actually saying every 15 seconds in this example, find me a feature flag and did its value expire, and actually I'm forcing it to expire for every 15 seconds. And actually I'm adding a label into this equation. And that adds another dimension of just, is it a Boolean true or false? We actually can now tie things like your environment, whether you're running in development or production, as an automatic label, and then have multiple ways to support multiple environments to all of your flags. I'll talk more about that in a second. Just trust me. It's pretty cool. Okay. Now, so that was a little bit of setting up the feature flag in Azure App Configuration. In case you're somewhat new to Blazor or haven't really done a ton with it, it's basically Microsoft's answer to the future, as they believe, with WebAssembly. It's got Signal R for real-time communication, and that's one thing that triggered my mind in my scenario. Remember, I want to build a real-time leaderboard, and I needed something to do that, and the Blazor framework has that all kind of built in. I don't have to worry about kind of setting up my own Signal R configuration. I could rely on the Blazor framework for that. And its promise is that also any kind of JavaScript interrupt with making changes to the DOM, that's in the framework as well. And that's pretty cool because that's actually what I needed. So that's kind of why I picked Blazor. In fact, there's two key ways to do Blazor, right? There's the WebAssembly client-side Blazor, if you will. There's also the server-side Blazor. I chose to do this project in server-side Blazor because probably when I wrote all this original code a year or two ago, the client side wasn't there yet. The server side was a little bit more mature, a little bit easier to use as a learning tool. Because this was also a learning exercise for me as well. Okay? Blazor's pretty cool, bottom line. I just want to say that as well. And what it really turns into, again, in case you're new to it, this is like a getting started hello world example. You can basically put a button on a page and use components to handle the behavior of what a counter does or a label update does. And in one file, you can define your HTML, have button click events, and when you click them, without a full page refresh, not the old school, ASP.NET web forms, don't get confused with that, the whole component will just update. And that's because Signal R knows how to handle the interaction between the client side and the server. I can't say that as well as Scott Hanselman can, so at the bottom of this slide is a link to Scott Hanselman's blog. He goes into Blazor and Razor components and all the tech that, frankly, that's where I started to learn how to do this. And it was a great post to help me understand the basics, so that's why I'm recommending it here. Okay, also, part of my equation, my scenario was to build a leaderboard for CrossFit rolling that didn't have a lot of cost to it. I didn't really want to spin up a server. I didn't want to have to provision a SQL database for something so small and short term. So I really wanted to go serverless and API first. And that's where the tool that came to mind was Kontent by Kentico. That is a headless CMS. It's found at content.ai. It's one of those CMSs that I said my team and I use all the time. And it really kind of allows you to have an API in the cloud, but yet total management of all the content of the API. Think of like building a web page or a landing page or product detail page. You got like product image and price and quantity and total and attributes. Instead of just hard coding all that into the database, it's nice to have a management interface so that other people on the team can manage it. That's what this headless CMS does. So I chose to do that because, frankly, I knew how to do it already. And that's the thing that will allow other people to maybe submit their team picture, which I'll show in a second, or submit names. And I could track all that, and I could handle entering multiple teams into the leaderboard of the CrossFit rolling thing I did. So let me just quick show you that a little bit, because this is probably new to many people if you are watching this. I don't get a lot of people who know what headless CMS is still in the .NET world, and my mission is to shed a little light on that. So I'm going to do a very, very quick demo of what that looks like. And I'm going to do that right here. So I've logged into Kontent by Kentico, okay? And what I'm showing you is the content items that make up each of the teams. So for instance, Biz Steel was my team that I played on in the rolling. So I had a name, team name, I had a logo, which can have its own way to interact with media. Again, allowing people to add pictures to the scoreboard in the team system. And then the score was tracked on this piece of content, all right? And everything that I put in here, and you can see, I'm going to go back a second, we have many teams. I could easily create a new team by picking team, clicking create, and I would make one, and I have the ability to fill out all those fields. Not a big deal. But all of those things in there are published and allowed to get exposed via the API. And what does that look like, in case you're new to a headless CMS, is it looks like this. What I have here is the delivery API aspect of Kontent by Kentico, and I have my project in here as an ID, and I'm asking for giving me a team name. So this is my team again. BizStream1 is the unique name to my team name. I can hit refresh, and this instantly gives me the JSON that represents what I just showed you in that management interface. And it's fast, which is one thing that I really, really like about headless CMSs in general, is they are amazingly fast, even though we're still going across the internet to get to them. They're powered by global content delivery networks. They're optimized for performance. In fact, any of the images that are delivered through the API response are also on their own sort of content delivery network. So you can do some very cool things. Oops, paste that twice. With like getting out that image and making it smaller. See how fast that loaded, even though it's a tiny image. But trust me, it loads very fast. Okay, so that was my management aspect of the back end of the leaderboard. And I had a lot of fun putting that together. So let me quick step back a second into the talk, because that's all I wanted to show about that. And I went back one slide, that's fine. So that was a quick demo of just where all that data lies and how it's editable. By the way, Kontent by Kentico, a lot like General Grievous, is very flexible in the .NET world, and that's, again, it's an API. So you can use it with .NET MVC, Razor Pages, you can use it with Blazor, you can even do it with Jamstack. In fact, I've talked a lot about using it with Jamstack in the past. It's very cool. It supports almost any development model. In fact, you don't have to do .NET. You can do all sorts of other technologies. You want to do Python? Cool, go for it. You want to do TypeScript that has SDKs, APIs for all of it. And it has a way to actually import and modify data as well, not just get data out, is what I first showed. And that's why I thought the General Grievous thing made a lot of sense. We got lots of lightsabers, lots of flexibility. The guy's jumping around all over the place. He's spinning, he's shooting. He's badass. We'll just leave it at that, okay? So is Kontent by Kentico. And in the C# code layer of the Blazor app, the code to go get content is very simple. That's the other thing. There's an SDK. You add a NuGet package, you're off and running. It's literally one other file plus here's what your controller looks like that says, in this example, we're just asking, go get the API for one content type called article, filter that down, and render out a list of articles. But it's like, if you look at this controller, it's like 7 to 5-ish lines of code to get from that API. And it saved me time. I didn't have to spin up a database, didn't have to worry about all that stuff, defining database tables. I can build a content model however I want in Headless CMS, put data in it, and get data out of it very, very quick. So, pretty cool. All right. So that was kind of demos of a lot of pieces and parts and aspects of this. Let's talk about the whole thing a little bit, okay? And, oops, wrong button. To do that, let me jump back to some code. I bet you're ready for some code at this point because we've talked about everything else quite a bit. And let me set this up a little bit here as well. So, actually, I'm going to show the browser a second. So the app that we've been looking at and talking about is actually running at CrossFitRolling.app. And you can see it's here's the scoreboard, right? Team 1, because I just reset some stuff earlier, and this is production, it's not loading the most recent things, is set up like this. But if we click into like the teams, that's where that image comes from, out of content, right? That's what we've talked about it. It allows me to generate this screen really easy. And this is what I had everyone go into to actually, during the live event, manipulate their scores. So we gave out this URL, CrossFitRolling.app. Everyone was on their phone, and it was very simple. It was go to your team name, find your team, and then add to your current score what it was. So I'm currently at score 0, and I have 10 frames left. I was reset it to the beginning, right? But if you're almost done, like actually Team Hungry Like a Wolf, also great picture, they have no frames left, which means they've rowed all the way through, and they got a 1 in every frame. Again, pretty cool. They're good. I'm very jealous that they're that good. It actually might not be a real score now that I think about it. Probably testing score. So anyways, that's what everyone did. And that is what this project is all about. So if we go over into, I guess let's just talk about stuff a second. If we go over into, let's go over to index. This index code, very, very simple. Let me zoom in a little bit because that's actually probably way too small for anyone. Actually, here we go. Yeah, we'll zoom in one more. Sorry, my eyes are terrible, and zooming in on code during talks is always a good idea. Okay, so ignore the IntelliSense for a little bit. It's probably just because I haven't built it. But that whole page was basically made by a leaderboard with a jumbotron, and then I'm iterating through components of Blazor that are a team scoreboard item. Super freaking simple, right? That's one thing I really like about it, because you can define your own components. Those are in the component folder, and when you look at those components, other HTML fragments, it's like the typical web development stuff. So I don't know if I really need to go more into this. But what is interesting is actually the code behind it a little bit. So remember what I said? I failed. And that's because this function right here, I didn't actually have this code written the right way. So what I did after the event is I went back and said, why did it fail? Why did it not update? What the heck did I do wrong? And I actually thought about this. Why don't I do this for real as a way to fix the scenario? And I added feature flags in there to, number one, teach me about the technology, and number two, think about like how can I fix this. So with this simple line of code, I'm asking the feature manager that comes from the Microsoft NuGet package to say, is one of my features enabled? And I have a feature flag defined as live reload. ooh, live reload. That's the thing that I think we saw before in the Azure portal, right? And it was. So if we go to this file, this is one of the important things of, like, the one sort of hidden dependency is, if you make a public enum class called feature flags, that's how you can kind of refer and use FeatureManager as a controlling object, if you will. You have to actually name the feature flags. The enum, the string values have to be exact matches to what's either in your app settings file or up in Azure configuration. So I'm talking even letter by letter, case sensitive. So we have capital L, capital R. Those flags then will automatically map because we've wired up in our startup in our program.cs, we've wired up the Azure App Configuration. It does the magic of knowing that live reload here in this enum means live reload in the Azure portal. So we'll go back to that second. See how we've got the same exact titles? Live reload. Now I actually have 3 live reload features or flags in Azure App Configuration because I have 1 without a label and 2 with labels. The first label is development and the second label is production. And that's the thing that allows me to maybe have the same feature. But remember when we did the wire up, we said, I'm looking also for a label of the development environment or production environment, the environment variable of get current environment. That is the thing that says, when I'm running on my laptop locally, look at development. When I'm running production, look at production. So now I have actually the ability to toggle on and off things in the same screen, you know, for multiple environments. And that's pretty cool when it comes to labels, in my opinion. So, and again, the code that makes that work, just to make sure that point is clear, is right here. So my actual real local host has a updated code that kind of fixes the scenario. And what I said is, you know, I want to get the environment variable to lower it, so that's why you saw the label value as lowercase. And I'm saying, for today's demo, or for today's talk, every 5 seconds, go ask for new values for these feature flags. And I'm asking also where the label matches. So because we're running in development mode, we're only ever asking in this code base for live reload at development as a label. And that's the code that makes that happen. All right. And when the state changes, that was a little bit back to here. The state changed event or on after resync, those are the Blazor specific things about when a page changes or when you want something on a page to change. So I've actually got that in a task that's checking like another every 5 or 10 seconds for did something change on the server, and it's waiting, actually in our case, in Kontent by Kensco, and it's waiting to get updates. So if something's changed, I'm actually pushing the fact that, yeah, go update the UI now in this code and do it based off of the status of the feature flag being enabled to start live reload or disabled to stop live reload. So I've talked a ton about some of the setup and using it. Let's actually see it in action. So I'm going to do a .NET build, just to make sure I didn't break anything in the last couple of minutes before doing this talk. Cool, looks like it works. And then I'm going to do, so I can see this again, I'm going to do .NET run. So what that's going to do is fire up the app and make sure it's running. Let's actually open up a real browser to my development environments. You can see a couple of debug notes just happened there. Okay, all right, so when I'm running in development, I have a little bit of a flag or a label that says to me as a developer, yep, live reload is enabled because that flag up in the Azure portal is enabled. And this is the last time it checked that value. Now I probably should have put seconds in there so we could see that, but if we wait a whole minute, this thing is basically going to go check for did that date time change. However, I actually have it set for every 5 seconds. Go look at did a flag change or something. So right now, let me go through with live reload enabled what that does to the app, and then we will toggle live enabled off. We'll disable the feature, and we'll see that label go away. Okay, so all right, if we look closely, right now, the score for my team is 12. All right, and now remember at the live event when we were doing the real CrossFit rolling thing, the reason that my code broke is I expected other people to maybe refresh, but nobody was doing that. So it really does have to look at the server. So I'm going to simulate what if something changed from the server side. Okay, and to do that, I'm going to go back to content. I'm going to edit my score. So I'm going to create a new version of this content item. And instead of saying 12, maybe I got a 5 on that. So I'm going to say 17. And there's only seven frames left. Okay. So anytime I make a change in my CMS, I want to publish it. And that's kind of up here at the top. I'm going to just say publish. So yes, it's going to ask me, do I want to publish? And yes, I'm good with publishing. So what that did is kind of update the item of score. And if we go back here and we look at my local host, now we're going to have to wait a couple seconds for the content delivery API to update, and then also the 5 seconds or so. Oh, there it is. So while I was talking, you can see that I didn't touch the browser, nothing refreshed. Trust me, no magic behind the scenes. The Blazor app was polling, did something change by calling the API to the delivery API, and now I've got 17. So that's live reload. Live reload is enabled. And again, if I wouldn't have done this stupidly, I would have added this feature before the event, but I waited till after the event because, never fails. The demo gods just weren't happy with me. But now let's look at so without changing any code, and here's the whole point of feature flags really. Without changing any code, I'm going to go back to the Azure portal, if I can find it. Oh, did I actually close that? No, maybe I went in here. No, maybe I actually closed it. Sorry, we're going to go back to the Azure portal. I must have accidentally closed it. And we're going to disable that feature flag, so ignore what you're seeing right now. Okay, so I'm getting to my feature manager inside of my feature flags, and I am going to turn off that flag. Okay, so it's telling me in Azure that the flag was updated. Now, it's going to take a little bit to update, but if we go back and we wait probably about 1 minute or less, what's going to happen, hopefully, is that with that flag turned off simply in the Azure portal, this page is checking a little bit over time, and it's not like immediate, but it should basically disable the live reload, and we should not see that date time update past 124, 125, or I'm just getting unlucky. You know what? I'm just going to force a reload here a second. Oh, that should have gone away by now, but we could just be getting unlucky on time. Oh, there we go. I closed the message. I changed something in the app, and now that label is gone. So that now says that this isn't going to update automatically, and I didn't have to start and stop my app, and I didn't have to redeploy the code. And that's one of the major benefits of feature flags. We simply can control it with enabled or disabled here. And by the way, there's other ways to do this. You don't have to do it through the Azure portal interface. There's APIs. You could put this in some DevOps variables. There's more ways to use these things than simply worry about logging into the Azure portal. However, I think it's pretty cool. And if you think about it, you could do a lot of things with this. But that's the demo of the app and what it does and how it works. So let me try to go back to the talk here a second. And there we are. Okay. So that was the demo of the app and the feature flags and toggles. as we've talked about, there's some Blazor benefits. Also, R2 wants you to know about these benefits. Blazor is really great from a developer experience. It's fast from a performance standpoint. It's very secure. .NET 6 has made a ton of updates to this, and it's got even better. And there's lots of specific tooling that helps you out. So the talk isn't really about Blazor that much. I'm hoping that a lot of people nowadays know this. Maybe a year ago it wasn't as known, but if you follow the Microsoft development stuff, you should know about it fairly easily. Check out the docs site or learn Microsoft.net site if you're curious about more about Blazor too. So what I really want you to take away from this talk is that the benefits of feature flags in Azure apps are really that sort of idea of built-in configuration that's external from your app, instead of just always thinking of app settings and local settings are the only way to do things. It's super easy to integrate. It's almost real time. It's like within a minute or so that everything can kind of update as you turn things on and off. And it's really great from a, like, say you need to deploy a new feature to maybe only certain users, or you want to maybe deploy a feature at a certain time but have to redeploy your code. You can really separate out the fact that you are turning on and off features, like maybe showing a new menu item in your menu, changing buy now to store closed because there's maintenance. There's a lot of things you could do to enable or disable features, and Azure App Configuration gives you that sort of cloud-based way to do it. I think it's super amazing, and I really wish people would use it more. So, in summary, I hope you've seen and it can map in your mind how I used feature flags to handle configuration from turning on live reload or off live reload from my app. But, you know, it's this theme of this conference. You could maybe use it to fight for the dark side or the light side, depending on how you want to think about toggling your force abilities. I know it's a stretch, but at least I thought I'd throw it in there. Blazor's pretty darn cool, right? In fact, it's something that I have a ton of fun with. And Kontent by Kensko is a great headless CMS. So if you're curious and have questions, like, hey Brian, why was this talk about not about Star Wars, and why is it about CrossFit? Well, sorry about that. It just happens to be. But more realistic questions about, can I really use C# to write JavaScript? You can get a hold of me. You can get a hold of BizStream or check out Kontent for headless CMS. But that is my talk for you all. Definitely really appreciate it. This is how to get a hold of me. And again, I want to thank Brian Gorman as the organizer of the event. He's done a fantastic job for setting this up. And that's it, everyone. So go enjoy the rest of May, and May the 4th be with you.